Welcome to Off the Record News. I'm your host, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. Off the Record News is a weekly news program brought to you from the SPNN studios out of St. Paul. Now tonight we are going to talk about something as simple as citizen engagement in voluntary commissions who advise councils when making decisions. Now this, of course, goes right to the principles of grassroots governance. But what happens in your community when you have a council that takes step by step actions to silence the grassroots involvement of its residents in the decisions being made by the council? What do you then have? You have then a community that is ripe for a citizenry of disenfranchised individuals or people who don't know what's going on in their local government until a decision is made that impacts them personally, and they wonder, when did that happen? Well, tonight what we're going to focus on is the Maplewood City Council's decommissioning of the HEDC Commission. HEDC stands for Housing Economic Development Commission. And if you've watched these news programs on a regular basis, you know that very frequently we have film footage from the meetings of the HEDC Commission, which talks about what is happening at the grassroots level in our community when it pertains to the Rush Line BRT, when it comes to the redevelopment of the Gladstone neighborhood, when it comes to looking at other types of proposals for development, redevelopment, housing, the rental ordinance, any number of issues that are before the City Council, typically in the past went before the HEDC Commission. For the HEDC volunteers, the people of the community that are appointed to that commission, to listen to the issue, the presentations, the pros, the cons, and then from the residents' point of view as a serving member on that commission, giving recommendations to the City Council as to what they believe the direction is the council should take. Well, now in Maplewood, there has been a slow process in making the HEDC Commission irrelevant. Originally, the HEDC Commission, they met every single month because there's a lot of work to be done in Maplewood, because as a first-ring suburb, there's a lot of discussion about development, business retention, redevelopment, the balance between housing and commercial development. There's so much that this commission could be involved in, considering the scope and their mission. What the City Council did is they started to send fewer and fewer of the proposals to the commission to review before those proposals came to the council. So they were taken out of the loop. Then the commission decided that, and the City Council decided rather, that the commission should only meet quarterly. Well, of course, what happens when you then say that a particular commission should only meet quarterly rather than monthly, what happens is that when they do meet, it's a catch-up session, a catch-up on what has gone on at the council since the last quarterly meeting of the commission. So the commission doesn't have much opportunity of discussing anything in the future, forward-looking. They're always busy looking backward and being caught up with what has occurred since their last meeting, which you can see how that changes the paradigm in making them feel like now they're irrelevant. Once commissioners start feeling that their time, their investment in this commission is irrelevant, then they start to not attend, then the meetings get changed and moved around, and you see it just helps to break down that process of having commissions in place who help to provide recommendations to the council, recommendations based upon resident viewpoints of people who live in the community. So then in, I believe it was in November of 2018, the City Council had a presentation by their city attorney talking about how the powers of the HEDC Commission, since they are also a redevelopment commission with certain statutory powers given to them, that maybe those powers, since they weren't exercising them, should be instead transferred over to the Economic Development Commission, which, coincidentally, the Economic Development Commission isn't really a commission at all. It's really the city council members with a different hat on their head. So you see what happened is that they're looking at decreasing the amount and involvement of the HEDC Commission. Then they decrease the number of meetings. Then they have a presentation that says, because they're not exercising their powers, we should take those powers that they have, take those powers away from them that they have according to statute, and give them over to the council so that the council has all the power with no oversight or input from the Redevelopment Commission. Well, let's get started with our film footage, because we're going to start with the film footage from now July 2019, when it finally has come before the council once more to make the final stab in the back to the HEDC Commission and, in essence, decommission them by taking away all of their powers. So let's get started with our first clip.
I made a presentation a year ago, June, on this matter, and again last November. And what we talked about at that time was the fact that the city has divided or failed to combine, I guess is the better way to express it, its powers in terms of development and redevelopment. The city created a Housing and Redevelopment Authority in 1974. It created an Economic Development Authority in 2009, but failed to combine those two so that the powers under each of those statutes was not combined, and different bodies exercised them. The city transferred the HRA powers to its Housing and Economic Development Committee in 2012, but again, kept the powers separate.
That is the Maplewood City Attorney, Mr. Ron Beatty. Now, he has an interesting use of words there. He said that the city failed to combine the powers of the two committees or commissions when they were formed. He first started out by expressing it a different way. However, he corrected himself and said that they failed to combine. Because originally he said that they chose to have two different bodies, with each body having their own separate powers. And you see, under the state statutes, that is indeed how it could be set up. A city does have discretion as to how they want to organize their economic development commissions or their redevelopment authorities or any of those types of bodies. There is flexibility in the statute so that the community can pick the way that they feel is right for them. And at the time, Maplewood felt it was right to set it up the way they did. It wasn't that they failed to combine, which is now the new storyline, because you see, what they want to do is they want to say that whatever that past council did, that they were ill-informed, that they did not know what they were doing, that they did it wrong. And so now this council, who is going to be up for re-election this fall, can claim that they are the knowledgeable council, that they are the ones who brought light to the city of Maplewood. Not that what they've done, in essence, is just change the public policy of development and redevelopment in Maplewood. It's okay that a council changes the policy. That's their right. That's their entitlement to do so. However, to then color it with the projection that somehow the policy of previous councils was not correct or wasn't done correctly legally is improper. Just come out and say that you want to have a new policy, that you want all the power to be put into one body rather than split between two bodies who have to work together. So you see, there's a distinction there. Now, I know that he mentioned in 2009 that the Economic and Development Commission was formed. That's right, it was. At that time, I was the mayor. And we did form the Economic and Development Commission because we knew there was value in doing so. We also formed a commission that was called the Business Economic Commission, which was not about redevelopment, but was about business retention and developing a welcoming environment for businesses in Maplewood. And the makeup of that particular commission was not only residents of Maplewood, but business owners who had businesses in Maplewood, that these business owners did not necessarily have to live in Maplewood, but they had to have a business in Maplewood. And we also designed it so that there was one seat that was specifically to be filled by a small business owner in Maplewood. So we had a very specific criteria as to who was to serve on that committee. But after a few years and a new mayor and a new council, they decided to change that model because they found that some of the business owners on that commission were very outspoken about certain things having to do with business. And these were some of the very issues that originally we wanted to get to the heart of so that we could make Maplewood more business friendly to understand the business perspective. But then once the business perspective came out, then the future council under Will Rosbach decided that we don't want to hear this stuff. What we need to do is that we need to combine it with the Housing and Redevelopment Commission. And that is what Attorney Beatty was talking about. That was done a few years then, like I think he said 2012. So you see, that's the history. He kind of leaped over part of it there. And you see, at that time, they decided that there was value in the policy of having the Economic Development Commission, which is those seats are filled by the city council people, and having the Housing Redevelopment Authority, and having that, the commissioners on that who are volunteers, residents from the Maplewood community, so that you get a different perspective, not just the elected officials' perspective. So let's continue on with our next clip.
What you've got before you tonight, again, kind of a culmination of what we've talked about in the past, is a modified enabling resolution. That's the statutory method by which an EDA is created. And what it does is combine both EDA and HRA powers. EDAs have become the preferred development entity for cities because they allow the body to operate with HRA powers, EDA powers, and the powers granted to cities under the Cities Development Act. So in other words, it gives the entity the broadest range of powers as possible.
He said it very clearly. It gives the entity the broadest range of powers. There's no checks and balances. There's no recommendations coming from another board, another commission, or anybody outside of the city council. Because sure, it's an EDA board, but you have to remember that the people who serve on this EDA board are the city council members. And in Maplewood, there's another wrinkle to all of this. You would say, well, I mean, if people in the community are concerned about a certain redevelopment or development that's going on, they'll just go to their city council meeting and tell their city council members. But you see, in Maplewood, that public comment time has been eliminated from the agenda. So residents can go to their Maplewood City Council meeting if they want, but there's no forum for them to give input to their council members at that meeting. It's been removed from the agenda. It's not held before the meeting as a separate venue. It's not held after the meeting as a separate venue. It's not held on a Saturday. It's not held at some unfilmed event someplace else. It's not held at all. It is absolutely gone. Now, of course, we are told that if the residents of Maplewood want to communicate with their city council members and their mayor about their feelings about what is going on in Maplewood, redevelopment, how much housing, the mix between housing and commercial, and whether or not there should be more voucher housing built, that they can simply send an email to their city council member or their mayor, or they can send them something on Twitter or Facebook or some other social media. Except that we know that for the most part, social media is a very ineffective way to communicate from a resident's point of view to their elected officials, because their elected officials only put happy talk on Facebook. They don't really talk about the serious issue. It might open them up to liability. They're not going to Twitter about the important issues in a community, because how much can you Twitter with the space that's allowed? It might be misconstrued. It's just easier to hide behind that cloak of a happy smile. And certainly we know that you could send an email to your elected official, but there's no communication back other than to say, well, I'm looking into it. And they may give you a little more, but you have no idea what other people of the community are emailing. Everybody is an island of one. So you see, that's why this is so important in Maplewood when they're taking these avenues for discussion away from the residents and then giving all the power for development and redevelopment to the council without having a commission. Now let's take a look at our next clip.
I think this will be the launch of what's going to be a more active and engaged EDA. The document in front of you, the modified enabling resolution, creates an EDA composed of 5 members, the City Council, which is currently the case. It includes some statutory provisions. It includes a few limitations, which I think are consistent with what is commonly in these resolutions. Not a lot of restrictions, because I don't think that's necessary when the EDA is the City Council. You don't have to check yourselves to the same degree that you might in other contexts.
Well, he couldn't have said it better. The EDA is the City Council, and you don't need to check yourself. My goodness, that's right. You are king of the hill. You do not need to check yourself. And now that we get that HEDC out of the way, we don't have to worry about them objecting at one of their meetings that they think that there's something amiss, or that maybe they have a different opinion than the City Council, who is just a rubber stamp for the senior city administrators and the city manager and their agenda for the city. Their agenda for the city. Not the residents' agenda for the city, but somebody else's agenda who doesn't even live in Maplewood. And you heard how he said that this will now give them a wide range of powers, and that they can expect that they're going to see an even more expansive use of those powers. Keep in mind, the EDA, the body that the council is a part of, they have the authority under state statute to also be a taxing authority. And in Maplewood, they have done their taxing authority, exercise that taxing authority for the last few years. They've been raising money and putting it in their little fund, and then they use that to do, well, redevelopment, I guess, but in essence, they haven't really done it with any type of objective parameters that they have set. So for instance, they gave out $70,000 worth as a forgivable loan to one business to do some remodeling to stay in Maplewood. However, there was no criteria as to exactly how they would look at, say, for instance, their business plan. Now, we have covered all of this in past news programs, so we're not going to rehash that. But it goes to say that since then, they still haven't come up with those criteria, and they still haven't done many of the things that they could do that are the very simple, basic things, rather than just tax and spend. Let's continue.
Council members, any other questions for Mr. Beatty? Hearing none, then we are going to, I will open up the public hearing.
Now, one of the council members did have a question. She is one of the council members that is appointed. Keep in mind, of the 5 people on the Maplewood City Council right now, 3 of them are appointed. 3 are appointed. Only 2 were elected. So only 2 really are beholden to the voters who elected them. The other 3 are all appointed. And that's why this fall in 2020, Maplewood, when they have their election, 4 of the seats of 5 are up for election. So it's going to be a very important election to watch. 4 out of 5 seats are up for election. Now, getting back to the question that Ms. Nesbitt asked of the city attorney, she wanted to clarify that indeed it is the city council members who are sitting on the EDA, and that there was some language about that the council has to approve actions of the EDA, and she was confused by the fact that if they're all the same people, how does this work if indeed the council is approving the actions of themselves on the EDA? I think it actually brought home the point that the city council, because they are the EDA, they don't have to monitor themselves other than to just rubber stamp their own ideas and decisions that they made. That's the only accountability that they have. Now, one thing I also want to mention here, what has occurred as a result of the city council passing this modified resolution to reform the EDA in Maplewood and decommission the HEDC, is that now, because of the way that they have reconstituted their EDA, this EDA under state law is able to employ an executive director, which they did that night. Who do you think the executive director of the EDA is? Oh, not some outside person, an outside person with a new perspective who will actually look at the protocols and make sure that everything is hunky-dory. From an objective point of view, no. They didn't go out and look for a different executive director to serve that role. No, let's keep it in-house. Melinda Coleman, the city manager of Maplewood, was hired to be the executive director. And the assistant director, the assistant executive director, oh, they can have one of those too. So guess who they hired for that? Jeff Thompson, who is the community development director of Maplewood. So they didn't hire people outside, other experts, other professionals outside of Maplewood to serve in these positions. It's sort of like just hiring your friends and family. And they can also pay the executive director and an assistant executive director a salary. Since this is a body that has taxing authority, and by the way, they have already requested a levy of $120,000. Since they can tax and they could collect revenue, and they could hire an executive director who happens just to be the city manager as well of Maplewood, and they can hire that assistant executive director, which of course is an employee of Maplewood. My question is this: is this another way to hide a financial pay raise to these two individuals by saying, oh, to the voters, oh, we haven't given our city manager a raise. And instead they really did give her a raise by appointing her and hiring her as the executive director and then paying her in that position for whatever menial work she's done with regard to that position. It's just a thought. So let's continue then with our next clip, where they are then opening up the public hearing to see if there's anybody who has something to say about this. And because this issue has been drug on since August of 2018, and then November 2018, and now July 2019, it's not on anybody's radar. Nobody even knows that this is going on, but they got to have a public hearing and let people speak on it because the law requires them to do so. If the law wouldn't have required them to have a public hearing, they wouldn't have opened it up to public comment. And yet there's no one to comment because nobody knows in Maplewood what's going on. But let's take a look at the comment of the one person who did show up, who does know what's going on.
Please start by stating your name.
As you said it, supposed Mayor Kevin Berkland, Citizens Reporter News. A launch, you heard it, a launch of a more broad set of powers. Do we need to give any more powers to our finance director and our city manager with the disaster they've made on the redevelopment, or the city council? You know that there's a commission to look at this right now, the HEDC. This is a commission made up of residents. You've taken them out of the picture and you put the finance director and the city manager in the driving space, a mistake. They have only been a series of poor public policy, a disaster. This council, of course, there's only 2 of you out of the 5 who are legitimately here. 3 of you are appointed members, representing the finance director and the city manager rather than the citizens. Of course, there was an elected person, and
Mr. Berglund, could you please let us know, what do you think about the resolution modifying the enabling resolution regarding the Maplewood Economic Development Authority? What's your position on that?
Mayor, I would request you would not interrupt my presentation. This is a public forum, and stop it. As I told you, it's poor and it's the wrong direction. Do I need to more clear? Because it adds more powers in a system that rigged the election along with the supposed good government, Ramsey County, to put people in here away from people who really won. You cheated
Mr.
the disabled.
Berglund, what do you believe then is the alternative to the enabling resolution? I'm trying to understand
Thank
your
you.
position.
You need to direct your city manager and your finance director, when you purchase those Gladstone properties, and did it under the cloak of secrecy and concealment without having the HEDC Commission involved, you need to bring them through these poor decisions so they can look at them and analyzing instead of rigging them, which this council has a history of doing.
Now, Mr. Berglund, you may recognize him from local news report and the Citizens Reporter. And that's one of the reasons why he, of course, understands and knows exactly what is occurring here, because he is one of the beat reporters on particularly this issue. Now, he brought up the fact that the city council purchased many properties in the Gladstone neighborhood without even consulting the HEDC Commission about it in advance. And that is true. We have covered that on these news programs in the past. And we actually even obtained the audio from the closed meeting when the city council was discussing how much they would pay to outbid another private individual who wanted to buy a property in that Gladstone neighborhood that the city had their eye on. And they specifically directed the city staff that they could go as high as 25% over the market value of that property to outbid that other individual who wanted to buy the property. And that is exactly what happened. The city of Maplewood outbid the other party who wanted the property. Maplewood got the property, and then they had to figure out where are they going to find the money to come up with to then finish the sale. And in that closed meeting, they discussed exactly where they would get that money from, which they later then discussed in an open meeting. But what they did is that they transferred $2 million out of the sanitary sewer utility fund, which is typically used as part of the funding to do road reconstruction work. They took $2 million out of that account and used it to buy this property and to do the remediation and basically for land speculation of property that they are now the proud owners of, a vacant building. They have to do demolition. They have so many things they have to do. And as the city attorney cautioned them in that closed meeting, you better consider the fact that once you get everything cleaned up and ready for sale, you may have to even consider, you might have to give the property away to a developer in order to entice them to build what you want to be built there. Imagine that. So does this sound like the kind of rational business transaction that anybody who is giving a recommendation from the community perspective would say, yes, I support that? But this was done in the closed meeting, which of course we find out after the transaction is already completed, because under the Data Practices Act, you can't get the audio of closed meetings until after the transaction is over with. But you can get it, but you have to be, remember that it's available, and then you have to go get it. But for those of you who may have missed that, if you go to our YouTube programming, you will actually find that meeting in its entirety posted. And what I've done is that I have taken the headshots of the people speaking during this closed meeting and put those headshots over the audio with their name and their title, so that way you can identify who is saying what and who is responsible for acknowledging that indeed it's okay to spend 25% over the market value to outbid a private entity who wants to purchase the same property. Well, let's continue then with Mr. Berglund's comments to the council.
You took the election away from a disabled young lady who won this election.
Mr. Berglund, the public hearing tonight is concerning the enabling resolution regarding the Maplewood Economic Development Authority. Would you please contain your comments to your opinion on that particular issue tonight?
I'm asking you once again to stop interrupting, because you are taking parts of my valuable 3 minutes away, and that is a disservice to
Mr.
the public.
Berglund, your time is up. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Now you'll notice that Mr. Berglund kept looking over to the side. What was he looking at? He was looking at the timer, because you see in Maplewood they have a big timer with big red numbers flipping by as you're talking. And of course, for many people, that is distracting and puts them under the gun, so then they kind of lose their chain of thought when they're talking. Again, it's another tactic to disengage the public, to make them feel uncomfortable, to feel unwelcome, that they're under the gun, that they have limited time. And yet these council members, in essence, they have nothing else to do when they're at that council meeting other than to do the business of the people. And when is it not the business of the people to listen to the people? So there you go. And of course, Marley Abrams, the mayor, she makes it even more evident that obviously the time is cut short. Mr. Berglund, your time is up. Now, one thing that we have commented on, and we've noticed that it appears that in St. Paul, they also time the residents when they're up speaking in front of the council, except that it is our understanding from watching their council meetings that when somebody is asking a question of the presenter or the resident who's making comments, that the timer is stopped, so that does not count towards the presenter's or the resident's time. Whereas in Maplewood, they don't stop the clock. They just keep talking so they can help run the clock down. Now, that doesn't seem very resident-friendly, does it?
Mr. Beatty, would you respond to the comments that were made during the public opinion part of our meeting tonight?
Mayor and council, that's somewhat difficult. The city council has always been the economic development authority, and to the extent that you've acted in that context, really there's nothing that's going to change. What's going to happen as a result of this modification, if it's adopted, is that the EDA will also have HRA powers. Basically, the HRA allows development and redevelopment, particularly for low and moderate income housing. Those will be married to the broader economic development powers of an EDA. So the council will continue in its role, but have a broader set of powers available to it.
Marley Abrams then threw the ball over to the city attorney, because she was hoping that the city attorney would then back her up to badmouth what Mr. Berglund said. And so she said, can you comment on this? And the city attorney is like, oh my God. Well, that's kind of difficult to do. And then what does he do? He then states it in his own words, exactly what Mr. Berglund said. That now you're giving all the power to the council and getting rid of the HEDC, the other commission made of the residents. That's exactly what the attorney said. He didn't contradict anything that Mr. Berglund indicated. But that was not what Marley Abrams was hoping for. Now, I want to mention to those of you in Maplewood that you're going to hear that he said that the Housing Redevelopment Authority powers have to do with voucher housing. Maybe one of the reasons that they took this power away from a committee that is made up of residents of Maplewood is because they're not confident that the representatives of the residents of Maplewood would want to have more voucher housing in Maplewood. So that's why they took the power away from them, so that they could give it to the council, and then the council can put their voucher housing in the Gladstone neighborhood for that density of 50 units per acre. Now, we're going to move on to the next part of our program. Sorry, I've got a cold here. But next, we're going to move on to the next part of our program, where we're going to fast forward to now November 25th, 2019. The City Council has decided that they are going to have a joint meeting with the members of the now decommissioned HEDC Commission. They never had a joint meeting with the members of the HEDC Commission while the HEDC Commission had authority. No, but we're going to have a joint meeting with them months after we took the power away from them. Now, why would they do this? Maybe because they want to get some feedback from them. I guess that could be one reason. Or maybe another reason is that there might be a little fallout from some of the committee members on that committee, not feeling all that good about having been relegated to the back corner someplace, and that their committee now is their commission basically has been decommissioned. Because in essence, what is their mission now if they're not going to be talking about redevelopment? So what Maplewood did is that they sent out these invitations. They're going to have this joint committee. Maplewood cablecasts almost all of their meetings. But this, again, is one of those issues that they are trying to decrease the amount of knowledge of people in Maplewood as to what's going on. Is that if you decide that you're not going to cablecast things, then people won't know what was being discussed, so that the people at the meeting know what was going on, and so then they can feel like their feelings haven't been hurt, and maybe they've been, there's been some damage control has been accomplished, but the people in the community don't know. Well, this particular joint meeting of the council and the members of the HEDC Commission in November on the 25th of 2019 was a 3-hour meeting. The city of Maplewood chose not to cablecast this very important meeting for Maplewood and its future. They chose not to. However, our production organization, Put Your Hands Together Productions, we were there with our cameras. So this film footage that you have is our film footage. Now, there was a city camera there. So it isn't that the city didn't have the capability of filming their meeting. They certainly did, because they had a camera there. But that gentleman was there simply for the purpose of getting film footage so that they can do little video vignettes to put on their YouTube channel and on Facebook to do the happy face thing, not to actually inform residents of the discussion. So in our first clip, we're going to introduce a gentleman who's new to this whole thing. And so he gets to be the facilitator. This is and the facilitator of this is the new Assistant City Manager of Maplewood. So we've got a clip from a city council meeting that introduces him so that you have an understanding of who the new Assistant City Manager is, the background he has, and so that way when you watch the film footage of the joint meeting and his role as facilitator, you can determine for yourself whether or not, if he is using all of his skills that he supposedly should have based on his resume. So let's take a look at our clip.
Now I'd like to just take a moment to introduce our new Assistant City Manager, HR Director, Mike Sable. Mike comes to us with a lot of great experience. He worked at the City of Brooklyn Park for several years as the Assistant City Manager and also the Acting City Manager, and has several years of experience also with Hennepin County. We are really thrilled to have him here. And with that, Mayor, I'd like to just let Mike take a couple minutes and introduce himself to the community and to yourselves.
Assistant City Manager Sable, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor and Council and community. Thank you for the opportunity to serve the City of Maplewood. As City Manager noted, I do have a 20-year history in local government, and I have a real passion for building and strengthening communities. Part of my joy is watching communities, when everybody is unique and everybody brings their own perspective, but we all share a common address and a common goal of building great communities. And I've been fortunate to be able to do that. And I started last Wednesday, and I've had an opportunity to meet with the leadership team and folks. And so the response and the welcome has been tremendous. And I noted today, I actually said, after day 4, it feels like home. And so that is a really great spot to be in a new position. And so I look forward to working with all of you and meeting all of you and serving. And if you have questions, I'll be around after the meeting and you want to say hi, and welcome it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's Mr. Sable, the new Assistant City Manager of Maplewood. Now, certainly, from his introduction of himself, it would appear, based upon what he said, that he would be somebody who's open to residents being a part of the grassroots development of the ideas and the policy in their community. That everybody has a voice, he says. Everybody shares the same address. These are his words. Certainly, you would think then that he would have been supportive of the city cable casting this very important joint meeting of the City Council and the members of the Decommissioned HEDC Commission. Now, keep in mind, when I say that the HEDC Commission has been decommissioned, well, they're still probably going to meet quarterly, but what is the value of their role in the redevelopment policy of Maplewood? It has been marginalized, it's been stripped of power, and so it'll probably go by the wayside, because what is their purpose now? Other than just to hear the reports of the staff of what the City Council has already done. Is that much community engagement? Probably not. Now, another thing I want to alert our residents of Maplewood about, that is an aside from our film footage that we're going to show now, but it goes to that issue of taking community meetings and commission meetings offline and not cable casting them and not webcasting them so that the residents know what's going on at the commission level and at the local meeting level. Is that Maplewood has decided that they do not have enough money out of their over a $40 million annual budget to cable cast or webcast the monthly meetings of the Maplewood Historic Preservation Commission. They have determined that they are no longer going to make those meeting videos available to the residents of Maplewood. Now, I will let our viewers know that I have volunteered to man the booth there at City Hall and run the equipment as a volunteer, because I do think it is important that the Maplewood Historic Preservation Commission is available online, on cable, and also webcast on the city's website. Because isn't the preservation of our Maplewood history and historic structures and the other important work that this commission does, isn't that important to Maplewood's residents and their heritage and understanding where their future may go? So you see, this is just now the next step in the legacy of Marley Abrams and her rubber stamp council. Is now they're going to start taking commissions offline because the city can't afford to have them cable cast or video cast. So you see, is that true? I don't believe it, because it can't cost that much. We've been able to do it in the past, and as I mentioned, their budget is over $40 million annually. And they not only have that kind of a budget, but they also collect all the PEG fees of the Comcast subscribers who live in Maplewood. And when they pulled out of the Cable Commission, the Ramsey Washington Suburban Cable Commission, Maplewood took that authority to collect those franchise fees and those PEG fees with them, and that amounted to $500,000 a year just for those kinds of items pertaining to cable casting, audio video equipment, communications, and putting things on the web. $500,000 a year they had infused from those PEG fees. And now they say they don't have enough money to put a commission on the air, when that is the only channel that Maplewood has remaining is their government channel. Go figure. So next we're going to start with our film footage that we have, and as I said, we've got 3 hours of it. So this is going to be a continuing report that we're going to have over a number of our news programs, but we're going to get started with it here tonight. And this first clip is of the commissioners introducing themselves.
So we are scheduled to go until approximately 6:45. The TV crew and the sound crew have to come in and do some sound and lighting checks. We have to give them some space to do that. So 6:45. If the move ends early, wonderful. If it goes until 6:45, we'll do a hard stop. But I think I'm reasonably confident that we're going to get through there. My responsibility is to manage time, and we're currently on time. So
that was the Assistant City Manager, Mr. Sabo. He said his primary job there is to manage time. Okay, well, there you go. Now we know what his primary duty is. So he's a pretty high-paid timekeeper. Let's continue.
Introduce yourself with your name, obviously, your role with the organization, whether it's a staff member or council member, and then for a little bit of fun, Thursday is Thanksgiving. What is your favorite Thanksgiving food that you're looking to having on Thursday or whatever day you celebrate, if you celebrate Thanksgiving? And by the luck of the draw, you're closest to me, so.
So I'm Melinda, the city manager. My favorite dish is most definitely I spend a lot of time on the preparation of the brine and the brown and pretty nice. It's like the flavor of love.
And your address, please?
And then, of course, finding the right wine to pair with the turkey. So that's my favorite. And then while I have the floor, I'd just like to make a speech on our EPA meeting on the 9th of December. I'm not sure what we have planned for that, so my guess is that we're going to finalize that, but I just want to make sure, is that where we were going with that December 9th meeting? Thank you.
Mark Jenkins, Chair of the HEDC, and Stephanie.
Joy Chuck, HEDC Commission, and Tricky Creditors.
Mary Lee Abrams, Mayor, cornbread stuffing and cranberry chutney. Two things. Aye for both of them.
So there we go. That's a couple of the individuals that are there. You've got the city manager, Melinda Coleman. You've got Mark Jenkins, who is the head of the HEDC. And then you've got Joy, who's a member on the HEDC, and then Marley Abrams, the mayor. Now, we don't really know a lot about the mayor, Marley Abrams. We know she's an attorney, that she's a skilled litigator. We know that she likes cornbread stuffing and cranberry chutney. Well, okay, those are good things. But we don't really know that much about really what her philosophy is or where she came from. Other than that, we can see from her actions in Maplewood that she doesn't believe that residents should have a voice in the policy created for their community. That really the powers should reside with the council, and that she has taken certain actions which are actually different than what she should be taking in a Plan B community like Maplewood. Maplewood is a Plan B city. Now, what does that mean? Being a Plan B statutory city means that the city manager is the one who runs the day-to-day affairs of the city, and that the city council basically are charged only with a number of items. One, to approve the budget annually. Two, to decide what laws should be on the books or repealed. Another one is to create the public policy for the community. And then also, lastly, to manage the city manager. The city council has nothing to do with the other employees or making grandiose decisions on how the city must be operated. And yet we have shown on time and time again that Marley Abrams abuses her power that she has, and she actually goes outside of the boundaries of what she is supposed to have. And the city council, the rubber stamp council, allows her to do so. The city manager is happy to let her have those reins, because then the city manager can just point to the mayor and say, oh, the mayor did it. You see how convenient that is. Well, let's take a look at our next clip.
Mike Martin, I'm the city's used to be the economic development coordinator, but now I'm the assistant community development director. And I guess for Thanksgiving, I'll go with my great grandma's tapioca jello pudding that we have once a year.
Now, this is the first time that we've really heard that Mike Martin, who has been at the city of Maplewood for a long time as a senior staff member, that he's now gotten a different title, because he was originally the economic development director, but now he's been shuffled off to somewhere else, because keep in mind, they hired Jeff Thompson as the economic development director. So I'm wondering, did Mr. Martin get demoted? I don't know, because it's hard to tell from the title that he indicated he has now whether if that was a demotion or not, but he even slipped himself in that he forgot which title he currently has. We will continue with our film footage and this meeting on an upcoming news cablecast on Local News Report and on Off the Record News next week. Bye-bye.